I'll just back up a moment or two and say, I'd like to kick this off with a little bit of background. And we can go back as far as traveling in the United States as a person of color when the Green Books were published that let people of color know where there were places that were at least welcoming enough to find a place to stay and get something to eat, and maybe no more than that. But it also listed places that under no circumstances would you be welcome there. It would be like being effectively in a war zone. And so they were given information that lets them avoid being in a war zone. And why did they need this? And I would say it's because there was a culture of bullying that picked on those who were least likely to fight back. And given the legal rights that people of color had in this country for so long, they were the least able to fight back. So they were the target. Then we move up to the 1960s when women were starting to be really interested in having equal rights. And there was pushback there as well. And there were places where women did not feel safe to go. And it was the concept of the broken stair came up. And that's when, you know, a woman would tell one of her friends, hey, that fella over there, he's to be avoided. Do they fix the problem? Do they fix the broken stair, or they just tell you to step over it? And so that is another example of how people communicated unwelcomeness. Later, the GLBT community was the target that bullies decided was least likely to fight back. And of that GLBT community, what we have today as probably the most attacked and bullied community from those who do the bullying is the transgendered community. And it was in context of the transgendered community when there was a woman who had made a very moving quote, which I will quote now, if you give me 1/2 second to bounce down to the description. Quote, for some people, going to an SCA event in Mississippi is just going to an SCA event in Mississippi. For others, it's like imagining going to an SCA event in Kandahar province. Now, I would like to introduce to you Dame Leonette de Covenham, who is the source of this quote, and would like to ask her to give a brief introduction of herself. And then we will pass it along to Jane the Reborn, and then I will follow that up with my own introduction. After that, we are open to an open discussion on the topic. So Dame Leonette, may you take it from here.
I'm very pleased to. Thank you so much. I'm going to limit myself now to just introducing myself and not starting to discuss the topic in spite of all temptations. My name is Leonette de Covenham, and I started in the society in 1980 in what was then the East Kingdom, and which is now Abilmark. My first very active years were in the Middle Kingdom in what is now Eldermere, and I have been in Drachenwald now for a good many years. And I am largely known as a fencer and to a lesser extent as an artist and craftswoman. And I have been Kingdom Principal Herald. I've been Principality Seneschal, and most of the time I try to avoid taking offices, though I'm not terribly successful. And if you look for me at an event, I'm almost certainly either about to fencing, or just finished fencing. Jane.
Jane.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jane the Reborn. I am a Westie through and through. I started playing in about 1987 when my parents started dragging me to events so long ago I can't even remember. I just can't say I was born here. I did about half of my, well, a little more than half of my SCA career presenting as male. About a decade ago now, almost, came out as trans. Took a small break from the SCA, came back in 2015, and I've been back in it ever since. I primarily heavy fight and work on advocation things for the trans community in the SCA.
Okay, well, our fourth presenter did manage to arrive today, after all, huzzah. So welcome to Yrsa O'Connor. And I believe East Kingdom, yes?
No, Atlantia.
Atlantia, okay, just a bit south. So what I would say to you is that the part that you missed was very little, and we are at the point of introducing the presenters. Just as the introduction of the person, we'll get into the topic as soon as we finish that. So who are you?
Those folks know me as Ulrich the Mad. I did start out in Ethelmark and then moved down to Atlantia. I started transitioning about a year and a half ago, and currently still show up on the field as Ulrich, more often Yrsa, partly because I don't have any good clothes. Do armored fighting. I've helped start the Verbated Steel fighting in Atlantia, rapier fighting. I love melee. Been around for about 25 years. I do go to Gulf Wars and Unzip. Anything else you'd like to know?
I think that's a good place to start with. I am Tenguistal Telenoris, and my friends call me Telenor, so please be my friend. And I am the Baroness of the Westermark. As such, I am helping to host this whole event today. That was the brainchild of Nissa, our Karahasi. Am I closer to it now? That is our West Kingdom DEI officer. I started my journey in the SCA in winter of 1982. I guess that's AS16 if I've done my conversion correctly. In the mid-realm, in the Barony of the Cleflands. I've been in 7 kingdoms since that time, including living in the east at a place that is now part of Ethelmark. Alistair, Baroness Alistair and I met each other in college. We have been on this journey all the way through since then. At one point, we were living in the outer suburbs of Philadelphia, whose shire name I have completely erased from my brain. It'll probably pop up in 15 minutes. And a job change required us to move to Houston, Texas, which is the Stargate, the Barony of the Stargate in Onsteora. And in the 3 days of driving with our 2 children from the East Realm to Onsteora, we passed through an awful lot of the country where 2 women raising children together as a family was probably not the sort of thing we wanted a lot of people to be made aware of. It just wasn't safe. It felt like there was a significant danger to that. When we stopped for the night at hotels, when we stopped at restaurants, I was the one who was referred to as Aunt Beth, not, by anything other than a connective relationship, not a parental relationship. This did not feel good. And we drove right past Lumberton, Mississippi on our way through Mississippi on the way to get to through Louisiana and into Houston. Houston is a very large metropolitan area full of lots of diversity, lots of support for every manner of the community you can imagine. And you could get in your vehicle and drive 20 minutes and be in the land of Bubba, where y'all don't want to be talking about things like that queer stuff. Islands, we have islands of safety. Well, at least acceptance from enough people to feel more safe. But that's not true everywhere. And so I'm wondering if any of our other presenters have specific stories about how they felt that where they were being asked to go was not a place of safety, and in fact, potentially even as considered a war zone for them and their community. Jane, go ahead.
So I'll share a little story about something that happened to me not very long ago at an event. This happened at Estrella 2020, literally a couple of weeks before we went into the COVID lockdown. So like I said, I'm from the West. I'm from Sacramento, California. I'm used to a very, very friendly, at least friendly to being openly trans, friendly to LGBTQ people in general. That's usually how the public is around here, more often than not, especially around the bigger cities. I figured going down to Phoenix wouldn't be too big a deal because it's a big city, a metropolitan area. You tend to find friendlier views towards minorities in larger population areas, more diversity, go figure. So we decided 2 days in that we were going to just make a quick trip off site, go get some breakfast at Denny's, and then go over to the Walmart to pick up some supplies, come back. While we were at the Denny's, my partner, my spouse, who is non-binary, was told that they were in the wrong restroom at the Denny's. And luckily they were already finished. We basically just paid and left. It was that awkward just at the Denny's. We go next door to the Walmart, and as I'm standing in line with my card at the Walmart, an individual comes up behind me, and this is an open carry state. It's an older gentleman, and asks me, "Are you a boy?" And then when I turn around to look at him, informs me, "You are a boy," while tapping the gun on his hip. Now, he didn't overtly threaten me. He didn't draw the gun. He didn't say he was going to shoot me. But who feels comfortable? Who am I to argue for myself or stand up for myself while this armed individual is gesturing towards the weapon on his hip? This happened in 2020 in America.
I love the idea that he didn't threaten you because he didn't actually draw the weapon. That's very giving of you.
It's an open carry state. He's allowed to have it.
He may
So-
be allowed to have it, but he knows perfectly well the difference between starting to indicate that he would use it and just keeping his mouth shut.
Well,
I
and
also
clearly
got
know what he meant.
very the other thing I found interesting was the reactions I got when I came back to site and was like, "No, we weren't able to get our stuff. This is what happened." And I think the thing that honestly got me and my spouse the most was the number of older white gentlemen that told us, "Oh, well, you just need a big guy to go with you. Then you'd be safe. Just get a big beat stick and bring a big beat stick with you."
Yeah, I'll carry a whole guy in my pocket just for in case.
How is it reasonable to ask me to bring a whole extra person to event just to be my personal security to make this happen? How is that fair or accessible?
It's not.
So,
Yeah, so let me pick
That's
up
my
on that
story.
point actually, because I think that this is important and it relates to my original posting that Telenor referenced earlier. Somebody posted just after Gulf Wars on the Drachenwald webpage, we want to get a good Drachenwald contingent to go to Gulf Wars 2024, which is fine so far as it goes. But my response to that was, you have got to be kidding, going to an event in Mississippi. And what I thought was interesting was the response that I got, which was almost in the first instance, from a cishet duchess who said, "I have never had anything other than good old Southern hospitality at Gulf Wars." To which, I was clearly being shut down, and I was clearly being shut down by somebody who is really close to me. And the clear message there to me was, get out of here with your queer minority difficulties. People like me don't have trouble in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and therefore it's not a concern. And what I really had in mind, and I had this in mind when SCA 50th was being planned for Mike Pence's Indiana, at a time when anti-trans legislation had been signed and had not yet been struck down by courts, which is, how is it that the society, that our club thinks it's okay to have major events in what I think of as no-go areas? And I don't live in the US. I haven't lived in the US since I was a kid. But one of the key takeaways I have from looking at current online advice for LGBT people, like the LGBT equality map on lgbtmap.org, is that we have a major event like Gulf Wars in what is a dark red state, and not dark red in the sense of has Republican voters, in the sense of negative overall policy on LGBT people, and also places where effectively I would have no rights, and I could be legally discriminated against. And that is, I think, a big picture policy concern for the SCA, because I understand we have kingdoms all over the US. I understand we have kingdoms in no-go areas. I don't think they shouldn't have events in their own states because they have groups, they want to have events. But I think that we as a society broadly have to think about what we are saying when we schedule an event, a major inter-kingdom event in a place that is outright dangerous.
Jane, you've got your finger. I think that's
Yes,
is raising a hand.
so-
I'll let you go first.
Just to help back that point a little bit, I did some cursory research while we were sitting here and looked up the crime rates in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. It's a little higher than the national average, which for most people wouldn't bat an eye. Myself as an LGBTQ person know that when I look at that number, seeing that, well, you're holding a site in a place that's got a higher crime rate than normal. As an LGBTQ person, I am, depending on the part of the country, 40 to 60% more likely to be a victim of one of those crimes. So you might be asking your populace to go into a little bit of a dangerous area, but for me, that's practically twice as dangerous. Why would I do that? So if you know autocrats, you know people hosting these events, maybe bring that up a little bit. Remind them that if it's just because it's bad for everybody, doesn't mean it means it's worse for us. It's worse for the minorities. If it's bad for the general population, it's going to be even worse for us.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about where are red places, because a lot of people, you know, especially if you're from the West Coast or perspective of a lot of Drachenwald and Lachak and that sort of thing, think, oh, well, it's the American Southeast, right? No, as Jane pointed out, it's the American Southwest. Alistair and I had an occasion on our way to Pensick 22, where we were stopping for lunch in Breezewood, Pennsylvania on our way to Cooper's Lake. And okay, so back in Pensick 22, there was a bit less of both of us. We were both weighing in right at about 100 kilos, 220 pounds, 5'10", broad-shouldered, fairly athletic-y looking build, me with long hair, her with short hair. And we were verbally accosted significantly at our table at the Arby's. Gee, which bathroom do you think it's going to use? Well, what about the other it? And it was clearly misgendering with intent to be verbally assaulting. And it was like, it doesn't have to be the American Southeast. They have a reputation, true enough, but this isn't something that applies to Meridies. This is something that applies to the SCA as a whole.
And let me add to that. One of the responses I had in a private group, which some of you will know of, to my point about going to an event in Mississippi was, to me, that sounds very anti-Southern. What about that island you live on, meaning Great Britain, where I live? And the whataboutism is interesting. The idea that to judge the state of Mississippi in particular, based on how safe people actually might be and what the legal situation is unfair, I think is interesting. Because what it shows is that our response as a club is not to say, we need to think about this, but rather we need to stop talking about this because we're not going to like where it goes.
Hmm.
And listening to Jane talking about the idea that within our society, one of the responses was not even, oh, well, that's a bit shit. It's terrible that you had to go through that. Let's have a hug, which is a perfectly legit response. But rather to say what you really need to do is give up some of your own agency as women or as gender minority people, and ensure that you don't go around unless you're accompanied. And we heard some pretty sharp remarks from across the room at that idea. But that we in the society have no control over legislation in Mississippi, or only marginal control over legislation in Mississippi. But we do have some influence over what our society is taught is an appropriate response to problems with townies. It used to be there was an entire genre of campfire stories in the SCA, all about relationships with mundanes. And I recognize we don't say the word mundanes anymore. I'm using it advisedly here. And there was an old story about, the people from the Shire of White Way, or the canton of White Way in New York City, going, all waiting for the subway. And the chaps were in tights and all that. And a bunch of nasty people said something like, oh, look, a bunch of faggots. And then all the guys rotated 180 degrees and they saw the swords on their hips. They said, oh, armed faggots, right? And that kind of story used to be a running joke. And what's interesting about that is that it means that there was a strong narrative about friction and lack of identification between SCA people and surrounding communities. And there was an idea that the SCA often broke real world gender norms in the way we did things, and that brought people into jeopardy. But we were comfortable telling a certain kind of joke about that jeopardy. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I wonder what stories we would tell today about the moment that Jane brought to us just now. What is the equivalent of that sort of response, and what does the non-sensitized dude bro member of the society from whom I have fairly neutral expectations, what is their thought, and what does their thought need to be, and how do we shape that?
I would love to hear from any participants as well as presenters, so feel free. I will wait till others speak before I take my time.
I think that's a really important thing for us all to start thinking about, because I think a lot of the time when we think about, is this an event I really want to go to? It's in a pretty a region that might not be so safe for me. We're thinking about people who don't play our game. And it's unfortunate, but sometimes the call is coming from inside the house. As an example, last year I attended an event in my kingdom in what outside the game was located in Kansas City, Missouri. And as part of the event, there's a fundraiser feast, which is fine. But the way the funds were raised was by auctioning off servers. Which, like, auctioning off people, I was like, okay. But my friends were like, we're all white, we're like, oh, it's fun, and like you play games, and like there's a lot of teasing, and it's like a really fun, happy time. And what it was a lot of jokes referencing American chattel slavery. Well, people I know were being auctioned off. And so thankfully something is being done about that now, and that won't happen at that event this year. But I think, it's not happening this year because my Laurel spoke to the seneschal there, not because we don't have a DEI officer in my kingdom, not because of talking to the advocates or like no one ever answered my email to the seneschal. So I think like, I forgot where I was going, I'm sorry. I think connecting our planning for how do we ensure that everyone is on the same page with being inclusive, with providing a safe space at events, even if we can't control the real world settings of those events. I don't know, I think that's important. And maybe it starts, I think it'll be different for every kingdom, but I think for my kingdom, it will probably start with like more round tables like what you guys are hosting here today. Because we don't have those like official paths to take to affect those changes. So I'm interested to hear what people who live in places who do have those official channels to run through, how would you guys affect changes like that in the places where you live?
First off, I think speaking out is huge. Like just you having the courage to share that with all of us. Furthermore, having the courage to see something wrong like that and take the steps, knowing that not everybody's going to see it wrong. That's daunting. Mike, like, props to you for doing that sincerely.
Read. Anyone else from the participants have thoughts?
I pretty much want to repeat what Jane said. Applause.
What's a team you seemed to be next?
If I may,
It's often difficult for people who have not experienced these fears, these attacks, these insensitive behaviors to understand how deeply effective they are.
Right.
And you can tell somebody, but they'll just brush it off. Well, I've never had that problem. And it seems to me it's hard to educate people about this who are not experiencing these issues. I don't have a suggestion. I don't know what to say, but
Yeah.
I'm a cishet woman. I have gone to Gulf Wars, and the whole time I planned, and the whole time I went, and the whole time I was there, I just kept thinking about how horrible Mississippi is to so many different kinds of people. And yet I wanted to be in the presence of some of my friends who live in other kingdoms, and I have no other opportunity to see them. And I've only made it once, and I did not feel good about being there.
Percy, were you about to make a point before?
Yes, I was going to call it on ears. Go ahead, Bruce.
thank you. Oh, yep, I'm on mute. So I'm fortunate, or possibly unfortunate, to be very early in learning these things personally. It's only been a year and a half. I still can look very masculine and not okay. So I'm starting to get bothered if somebody misgenders me, particularly if I'm presenting as feminine. And I love Gulf Wars. And my wife and I have talked about the dangers of going to Gulf Wars because of the states we have to pass through. One option for us is to go through South Carolina, where we stop off at Friends Bars, also in the SCA. And go from there down to Gulf Wars, which is a little bit better. Or the more direct route for us in Tennessee, which I'd have to plan around making sure I don't have to stop in that state at this point. It's just outright dangerous. And this is new for me. I was a paratrooper, a volunteer fireman. Lots of things where I learned about things that were really scary and did them anyway. I joined the U.S. team to go to Europe and fight Russians and Ukrainians twice at the age of 40. And this realizing that I could step into somewhere and somebody would attack me just for being who I am is very new to me.
Well, clearly the right answer to all of this is that the world freaking wakes up and we start respecting people. I don't think that you know, the SCA in a more specific case, or even any one of us individually, as you know, can make that happen. But my personal view on that is I work towards making that happen in any sphere that I can do it in, and perhaps the spheres will start overlapping. I'm not counting on it. That brings up the question, what do we do? Do we start talking to the Pensick mayors and potential Pensick mayors and saying, we love Pensick. We want it to be somewhere where everybody who attends can find a way to get there without having to be in a place that outside of the bounds of our encampments, maybe even our own personal encampments, that we're not going to face these kind of overt threats. You know, the other alternative at the other end of the spectrum is you just need a big stick boy to come with you, which is, you know, as Jane was recommended to, we clearly can't consider that a solution. So I'm really interested in hearing where we think we can actually have an effect and where it makes a difference. Now, Dame Leonette had her hand up first, and then we'll go to Jane.
I'm going to tell you, if I were mayor of Pensick and you came to me and said, we need to have the event someplace where people will feel safe from an ethnic point of view, an LGBT point of view, whatever, the answer would be, well, I guess we have to have it in Sweden, or I guess we have to have it on the moon because that way we don't have to worry about local people. You know, last time I was at Pensick, one of the things that struck me is seeing a Blue Lives Matter flag flying from one of the permanent residents at Cooper's Lake. And I mean, I don't have a problem with coppers. I live in a country with a different kind of police. I'm politically conservative. I'm an ex-army officer. I get on great with cops. But it suddenly struck me, oh my goodness. They're making a point with that flag, aren't they? And we can't make that disappear because that is the real world out there. But when I was listening to Yrsa speaking so frankly about feeling the privilege that she has foregone in allowing herself to be queered, I have 2 points in response. Point one in response is there is a way in which when I came out as queer, my friends and family were queered, and by association. And there are different ways to deal with that. Some of my friends and family cut off all contact with me because they did not want to be viewed as queer or queer adjacent. And for some of them that had career implications, for some of them that just had self-image implications. One guy who I knew in elementary school said, so were you spending all that time with me because you had the hots for me? To which my response, I bit down on the response of, you give yourself a lot of credit there, Steve, but that was a raw expression of the feeling of being queered. And one of the things I think we need to do is to be prepared to ask our fellow Scadians to accept a certain level of queering. And we have a camping event in rural Cambridgeshire here in England, and rural Cambridgeshire is a fairly permissive environment for the LGBT. You know, it's a big university nearby, not far from London. You're not in danger in Cambridgeshire. But one of our more senior members, when he pitched camp at that event, he, cis-het Duke, did not run up his banner in the middle of a field, in the middle of a village in Cambridgeshire. He ran up a rainbow flag.
Mm.
And what he was saying to the locals was, if anyone here is queer, we're all queer. And if you've got anything to say about that, maybe we'll talk about it, or maybe we will take our money elsewhere. And I think that one of the responses we need the SCA to have as an organization is effectively to fly the rainbow flag as a club. And that's a big ask for the club. And I'm not sure I could ask Glenavon or Meridies to fly the rainbow flag. But I can say that kingdom by kingdom, encampment by encampment, or event by event, in whatever way is locally meaningful, we need to say, if anybody here is queer, we're all queer. So that's the first thing. And that was my parents' response to my coming out, which was to go around to all their relatives and say, our daughter's queer. If you have a problem with that, best discuss it here. And I'm telling you because I don't want you to read about it in the British tabloids. So that's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing I want to say is related. And it has to do with what I was saying earlier about the stories that we tell. Our culture, SCA culture, is built to an extent around storytelling, around court as a storytelling environment. We don't always think of that as a storytelling environment, but it is. Bardic culture, and ceremonial culture, and what kings and queens and prince and princesses say and do. And the way to getting the society to a place where it says, if anyone is queer, we're all queer. And the way we get to the place where we say, if your neighborhood isn't going to be welcoming to our people, we will go elsewhere, is for us to start modeling those behaviors and telling those stories and singing those songs, saying these things in court, and as Duke Vitus did here in Drachenwald, to run up a rainbow flag, and interestingly, not a blue feather, because that only has meaning within the society, to run up a rainbow flag where the locals can see it, to run up a rainbow flag on the front gate, to leaflet locally and say, we are going to spend this much in your town or at your Indiana fairground for 50th anniversary. And you need to get your head around this. And if you start abusing our people, that no matter how they're dressed or how they're presenting, then we have the power to take our self-respect, never mind our money elsewhere. I'll shut up.
I really appreciate that. That's a great place to start. I think it really is. Okay, Ersa, you have your hand up. And you're muted.
Nothing like talking into a thing. In my coming out, I've been very fortunate. Everybody I know in the SDA, my family of choice, has been incredibly supportive. And I tell my story all the time. I think that it was said, and I agree, we need to tell our stories boldly, proudly, so that people understand that we're human, We're excellent people to hang out with, and we're going to be very supportive of others. I was very afraid when I went to Penzic the first year that I was in the process of coming out, that my camp mates, well-placed camp, big camp, wouldn't accept me, of course, my wife. So I rolled up camp, and there was a joke in Atlantia. I wasn't allowed to ever shave my face again because I did it once before Crown Tournament. The Queen looked at me and said, "Don't you ever do it again," because I didn't look very good at the peers at the time. But when I pulled up, I was shaved, and my friend looked at me and said, "Okay, why don't you have a beard?" I said, "I have a very good reason." And they said, campmates together, we'll tell them. I'll tell them. I did. And they showed me all the love I could take. So I'm fortunate Atlantia is very accepting and very supportive. We did at one point had a venue that was supported by a church. And folks started pointing out that this is actually not a good place for some of the population of Atlantia. And we canceled the contract with them because we'd set up a multi-year contract and found another venue. It cost the kingdom some money. The baronies kicked in to make sure that it wasn't a horrible hit. And those are the kind of things we need to do. And get everybody on board with paying attention to the area, the venues, who owns those venues, and start to make decisions about how do we make sure everybody that we know will be comfortable and able to be in this space. It's similar to folks that have varying disabilities, ability to move around on places that are unpaved. The folks that we know that have mobility issues, being able to get around those sites. And that's what I got for now.
Dame Leanna.
Thank you. I don't want to be sucking all the air out of the room here. I can talk all day, right? So do put your oar in. But and I see that Jane's got her hand up as well, so I'll be brief. One of the parts of that we also need to look at is how we empower people within our organization. In recent action around the board, there's this recent difficulty between the board of directors and somebody who was sanctioned for making a decision as an officer. And one gets an impression, and I'm part of the SCA that has a separate board of directors. We don't really play at that level. What I'm seeing is a bunch of the armored combatant senior peers, which I'm saying very advisedly. I'm not saying a bunch of knights, I'm not saying a bunch of dukes, a bunch of armored combatant senior peers seem to be shutting down a certain kind of discussion. I think it's really important that people who are empowered and who carry a lot of social credit within the society make it clear that when someone says maybe talking up a big Drachenwald presence at an event in Mississippi, maybe they need to listen to the queers, at least to me, of course, everybody else who cares, but they need to listen to people who are less empowered and be ready to be the voice of the disempowered rather than to be the STFU message to the disempowered. Sorry, Jane, you put your hand up just as I started talking.
Well, I've been waiting a little bit. So back to Elizabeth's comment and how do we make it better? there's a couple of things I'd like to bring up on this. One right now, we're in a period of pushback. And every period of history, every culture, whenever there has been a huge advancement, rights, more acceptance, things like that, there has been a period of pushback. In the last decades, we saw huge advances in LGBTQ rights and everything. Right now, we are feeling the pushback from that. Now, some of the things that we can do moving forward, and some other people in here brushed on them, is starting to change how we think about events and how we think about event locations. Which is where I feel like it all ties back into this, what the original subject of this round table, or at least this chat was, with the transportation site locations and getting to that event. If we can start getting people to think about things like accessibility at events and making sure that people with mobility issues can get around, there's lighting for deaf individuals so that they can still communicate, language accessibility, all of those things. It is also easier to encourage them, hey, we're already doing these things to accept these people. Could we also just add in these couple other steps that would also make trans people safer, gay people safer, POCs safer? It all builds on each other. We all do better when we all do better. And there's no reason that we cannot tie all of these fights together and overcome. The more people we have behind us, the stronger we are. The more different groups we can bring in to support this message, the better. And this is a message that supports women. It supports the LGBTQ community. It supports the disabled, the community, any community that has special needs, this should support. So if we can just start getting that being the mentality around events, that will help us all on every level. And
Fucking
all
A.
I've got.
I'm joining Leonette's clapping of the hands reaction to that for certain. Yeah, okay. I'll try to get over my speechlessness and ask Irsa, since you had your hand up and then back down again, if you had something to say while I get over my speechlessness.
I just want to first support that idea of all peers are equal, except we all know that some peers are more equal than others. I have certainly seen it personally where some royal peers took advantage of their position, and in one case, what finally wound up to be an R&D initially was a sanction and removal of all rewards except for their royal peerage. And I immediately thought that, well, that's not going to help, because that perception that royal peers are the true leaders and have more power to influence what goes on in the SCA. So, along with that, I think developing, since that's true, we find our allies within the royal peerages and get them on board and get them to call out and correct the behavior of others to help us be more comfortable. You said safer. I want all people to feel not just safe, but welcome, intentionally inclusive, deliberately looking at forgot the other letters. So there's that, and I think I had something else to say, but it's gone now. Oh, thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this. It's really important to me. Got some other things going on in the DEI realm. I've actually joined a group at work with the subcommittee for DEI.
I'll defer my time to Ainsley, because I'll probably have, flapping of my mouth things to do the wrap up, and I'll do it then.
I just wanted to say, I think that we can be really tempted sometimes when talking about stuff like this to jump to how can we do this work at the kingdom level, at the broader level, the big events. But really, it has to start at the small local events. We have to make our individual branches safer and more inclusive, and then work our way up from there, make our branches be examples. I wanted to share real quick a story. I'm in Glendoofin, which is in Southern Oregon, and we have leaders who have worked very hard to make it a safe space for LGBTQ people in particular, but then also disabled people and all kinds. Recently I was talking to somebody about SCA stuff because they had some interest in some of the things we do, and they're a queer person, and I was like, I just want to assure you, you know, the local branch is very inclusive and safe. We have a lot of queer people. And they said, oh, I always thought of the SCA as being a very queer space. And that, you know, that idea that they had was because our local group shows up to Pride, and they, you know, do all of these things to show support for the LGBTQ community locally and make their events a safe space. So really it starts at the local level.
Yeah. Nissa, several events back when we started coming back from doing the, sorry, I'm still speechless from everything I've heard here. This has been really quite a remarkable conversation. When we started coming back to events after pandemic cooled off, I won't say is gone, but isn't so hot as it's been. Offered the full inclusion flag, the trans flag merged with the pride flag, merged with the black, brown, and white stripes as well. And that, if I'd had my little gray cells working, I would have pulled it from the other room and brought it back here, but you know, it is what it is. And yeah, displaying that kind of welcomeness and openness across all of our opportunities to do so, I think will have a difference to make. Yeah, that's the one right there. Thank you, Nissa. The concept that we all have agency and a voice is true, but in the hierarchy of peerages and grant holders and award holders and populace members, it is a hierarchy, and I recognize that. I had not felt myself of much of the hierarchy until a few years ago when they decided to stick some laurel leaves on me. And I feel it even more strongly when next weekend they're going to stick pell feathers on me. And so I am committing to be a voice to their majesties, as it is my oath includes to speak and to be silent. And this is not an issue to be silent about. May we all speak up as best we can when we feel comfortable and safe to do so. I want to thank our presenters, Dame Leonette, and is it the lady or the Honorable Lady Jane the Reborn? I don't quite know. And
Jane the Reborn.
Yeah, and Lady Irsa, thank you so much. And I especially want to thank Nissa, our West Kingdom DEI officer, whose brainchild this entire event was, for doing it once as a single class, which became doing it once as a single event, which became doing it as an annual event. Thank you so much, Nissa.
I should say that I was actually met at Pelican a couple years ago.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. I don't mention it very often.
Magister Irsa, then, I guess, perhaps. With that,
Can I also say, I think it's great that we have like SCA celebrities here, like Urtatim Al-Kurtabia, who is just, you know, such a big presence on the web and across the society, and seeing such significant figures here at this event means that this is not just the queers getting together to bitch. This is serious storytellers able to spread ideas across the SCA.
Well, I would like to take a moment to plug my later in the day topic, which is the graying of the SCA, which came about because Duchess Ellis O'Byrne, having attended all the sessions last year and describing it as, you know, an amazing thing, suggested that she take this on for this coming year's. She also has a bit of a duty, as she is now the sitting princess of the Principality of Oertha and is in the process of traveling today, and so was not able to do that. That ended up being taken on by myself in lieu of her. And we have invited another person with a bit of an experience of graying in the SCA, His Grace Duke Frederick of Holland, aka Fleeg, who has been a part of this org since the beginning and is about as cis and het and male as I can think of. This is not a place for queers to just go. It's a place for all of us to go.
And nobody knows how gray my hair is because I'm wearing a veil.
Yeah, well, I've earned every last one of these. I'll tell you that right now.
I went and got mine colored a little bit.
With that, I would like everybody to return to the lobby.